This is Rue Saint-Louis. It runs through the heart of the old city of Quebec, a World Heritage Site that attracts millions of visitors every year. But many of them pass by this spot without realizing there's a remarkable bit of history hidden right here. It's easy to miss because it's slowly being swallowed by this tree. It's right down here. This is a bomb. It's been sitting here for more than 250 years. So long that this elm has grown up around it. And the story of how it ended up here, or at least the most popular story, and of who was living in this house when it did, is a tale of war and of corruption and of a sordid love triangle that may have changed the course of history. This is Canadiana. The summer of 1759. Quebec City is under siege. Down there, the St. Lawrence is filled with British warships, more than 200 of them, a quarter of the entire British Navy. There are more British sailors and soldiers down there than there are settlers in all of New France, and they've come to attack the capital. The world is at war. The great empires of Europe are clashing. The 7 Years' War is the first truly global conflict, and Canada is one of the most important battlefields of them all. Britain and France are fighting over the future of the continent, and if the British can seize Quebec City, which dominates the route up the St. Lawrence, the rest of Canada will come with it. For 2.5 months, the British bombard the city. The people of Quebec suffer and starve behind these thick stone walls under a deadly rain of cannonballs and bombs packed with explosive powder. One of those bombs soared through the air, up the cliffs, over the stone walls, and missed this house by just 3 feet, landing right here. Thankfully, it never went off, but some in Quebec might have wished that it did, because this was one of the most notorious houses in all of New France. It was a symbol of the decadence and the corruption that many would blame for the downfall of the colony. It was a center of aristocratic social life. Everyone who was anyone came here to eat and to drink and to dance and be seen. This was the house of Madame Péan. Her impressively long maiden name was Angélique Renaud Devenne de Melloise. She was one of the most famous aristocrats in New France, young, intelligent, charismatic, and beautiful. It was only a matter of time before she caught the eye of one of the most powerful men in the city, Intendant Bigot. He was the civic leader of Quebec, the leader of a city he hated and a colony he loathed. He longed to return home to France, but one after another his requests for a transfer were denied. He resented being in Canada, and it showed. If he was forced to live here, he was at least going to make a profit doing it. He used his position to line his own pockets, siphoning money from things like the food and grain supplies needed for the troops, and food that was already becoming too expensive for ordinary citizens. Bigot was 45 years old when he arrived in the city, and it didn't take him long at all to fall for the 25-year-old Madame Péan. They dined and drank and gambled together, and before long they were doing much more than that. The fact that she was already married, well, that wouldn't be a problem for anyone. This is Michel Jean-Hugues Péan, Madame Péan's husband. He too was a corrupt official, and he was always looking for opportunities to advance his career. He seems to have actually encouraged his wife's affair with Bigot, and wouldn't you know it, before long he was Bigot's right-hand man. They were a perfect match. Together, they took Quebec City for all they could. Péan got incredibly rich by selling food to the army at exorbitant prices and by exporting the rest of it to France while charging inflated fees. He got away with so much under the wing of Bigot that he died with a fortune of more than 7 million livres, $175 million in today's money, all stolen from the vulnerable city he was supposed to be protecting. The result was an underfunded army and an angry, starving populace. When the British arrived, Quebec City was already rotting from the inside out. When cannonballs and bombs like this one flew through the air, it was the beginning of the end. The British siege worked. That September, they won a pivotal victory over the French at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, just a couple of kilometers down the road. Days later, the city surrendered. The rest of the colony soon followed. Canada was now in British hands. It was the end of New France, and it was the end of the love triangle. Madame Péan, her husband, and her lover all fled to France. But rumors of their salacious relationship had spread across the ocean. It was the subject of gossip in Paris, too. There, the corruption scandal would become known as l'affaire du Canada. The trio was among those blamed for the fall of Quebec. Both Intendant Bigot and Monsieur Péan were tossed into the Bastille prison, but the money they'd embezzled from the colony had already been laundered. Like the gangster he was, Péan used his mountains of wealth to turn his prison cell into a palace. Every week he was sent bottles of wine from Bordeaux. Bigot faced a much worse fate. He was exiled from France forever, never again allowed to set foot in the country he loved. And as for Madame Péan, she stood by her husband until he died. But then she seems to have done a complete 180. She dedicated the rest of her life to helping the poor, especially the Canadian refugees who'd been forced to flee to France after the fall of Quebec. She made such an impression that nearly 100 years after she died, she was immortalized in a novel as a heroine. Today, few remember the story of Madame Péan. In the centuries since the siege, she's been overshadowed by heroic tales of dying generals and of the great battle that took place here. This old dud of a bomb is one of the few tangible reminders we have left, and soon it too will share her fate, vanishing into history. In less than 100 years, this tree will swallow it whole. Of course, like most things in history, there are two sides to this story, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. But first, I want to thank everybody who's already subscribed to our channel. It means so much. And if you haven't, but you would like to watch more episodes of Canadiana, you can just click the subscription link below. Thanks too to everybody who's become a patron on Patreon. We have so many more stories to tell you, but to do it, we do need your help. You can become a regular supporter on Patreon, or give us a one-time donation through PayPal. Every little bit helps. Now, for the second side of the story, Bigot and Péan weren't actually that unusual. Corruption and incompetence were kind of the norm back home in authoritarian France, and the government there was probably desperate to find scapegoats who they could blame for the fall of their colony in Canada, especially since Paris was starting to get a little bit unstable. The French Revolution was not far away. Though on the other hand, Bigot had just profited from the loss of the fortress of Louisbourg on the east coast just a few years earlier, which is a story we might tell in another episode someday. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Adam Bunch, and I'll see you next time on Canadiana.